Hello, welcome. This is Juno in aspect with other planets. So we did all this with Vesta, and so I'm just going to run through the information really quickly that we covered with Vesta, and with some minor adjustments for it being about Juno. But aspects in general, when for our purposes here, we're just going to look at the 5 different aspects, which are different ways that planets and points and asteroids connect to each other. And so we'll be considering a conjunction, an opposition, a square, a trine, and a sextile. If 2 planets or objects or points do not make any of these aspects to each other, then we say for now that they can't see each other and do not then relate by aspect. So aspects tell us the nature of a relationship between 2 or more things in our chart. Each aspect has its own style, signature, conflict, and strength. Some aspects are helpful and some are a pain in the ass. Some aspects between planets since aspects between planets is a topic that you can study literally for a lifetime, it's important to note that looking at aspects can become really confusing really quickly. If you have multiple aspects to your Juno, try at first to understand one aspect at a time. Start with what makes sense the most to you before moving to an aspect that seems more nuanced or further from your understanding or experience. We'll not get to cover every single scenario here in this session, but I hope that there's some clarity given through the rules and guidelines that we'll go through. Okay, so remember the conjunction. That's when 2 planets are in the same house, the same sign. In traditional astrology, if 2 planets, asteroids, or points are in the same sign, it's understood to be a conjunction, even if the objects are 29 degrees apart. In modern Western astrology, we usually consider conjunctions to occur between 2 objects that are within 10 degrees of each other. So that's 2 different ways of looking at the same thing. Conjunctions are the merging, unification, and union of 2 different planets, asteroids, or points in our chart. Some combinations are easier to work with than others. The closer 2 objects are, the more powerful the merging of their meanings. Conjunctions within a 3-degree orb, so within 3 degrees of each other, are the most powerful. 3 degrees and less are the most powerful. So that's conjunctions. The oppositions, remember it's known as Saturn's aspect because of something called the Thema Mundi, which I'll teach in another class. Planets in the sign directly across from Juno are in an opposition to Juno. So any planet that sits in opposition in the opposite sign from your Juno is in an opposition to Juno. Oppositions are most intense when they're within 3 degrees of an exact 180-degree opposition. Oppositions are oppositional, relationship-orientated, and adversarial in nature. So if we're looking at Juno, an asteroid talking about relationships, an opposition is very relationship-orientated in nature and going to pull everything out of us that we need to work with in terms of our Juno, i.e. our relationships. Some oppositions will be more intense than others. Remember, this is Saturn's aspect in traditional astrology, making it Saturnian in nature. And Saturn, to be Saturnian, Saturn is harsh, stern, withholding, but also maturing. Oppositions force us to deal with the other side of an equation. They test us to stay in balance. An opposition from Saturn is the strongest, possibly the most difficult opposition to work with in general. An opposition from Saturn to Juno may result in a lack of relationships or feelings of isolation, or create feelings of isolation. An opposition from Mars may feel like an attack from partners. I'm just talking about those 2 because they're the more difficult planets, but we'll go through everything. The square, remember, is the aspect of Mars. Any planet that is in the sign 90 degrees to the left or to the right of Juno is in a square aspect to it. Squares will occur in signs of the same modality. In traditional astrology, each planet has an aspect that they rule. Mars rules the square. If you think of a square, it's made up of hard angles, edges, sharp points. This is the nature of Mars. A 90-degree angle is a place of friction, 2 lines of energy meeting, neither can pass. A square from Mars or Saturn, again, the 2 most difficult planets, can manifest as a particularly cruel, difficult, or painful setup or circumstance. Nothing in our chart is a life sentence, but the difficult aspects of our charts are things that we need to deal with. They are places of concern, places to work on and work with. Squares are also very energetic. So beyond the paradigm of harm and help, there is a vigorous feeling to a square, which some folks can handle better than others in relationships. I say that because we're talking about Juno, right? So a square to Juno, for some people, will be like part of their nature because they might be very Mars-like in nature already. But for other people, it'll be really difficult because their personality might veer more towards harmony than discord, or more towards a calm energy than a disrupted one. The trine, again, is Jupiter's aspect. The trine represents flowing energy. Trines occur between planets in the same element. Trines are easier. They offer more gifts, but are aspects we can easily take for granted and not do much with. Trines are the signature aspect of Jupiter and reflect Jupiter's optimism, ease, and ability to create opportunity. The planets that trine Juno will want to assist Juno or lend their talents to Juno. And then lastly, we have the sextile, which is 60 degrees away from each other. The sextile is still a supportive aspect, one that brings help and connection, but in a more mild way than the trine. Sextiles happen between fire and air signs or earth and water signs. The sextile belongs to Venus, and therefore a sextile from Venus is the most powerful aspect that Venus can send. A sextile to your Juno will be helpful, but not defining in terms of your chart, in terms of your life. Try not to overemphasize their importance, but do consider it as something that can assist you along your journey of being able to manifest and access Juno's significance, which is relationship. Okay. And then again, remembering the sun is our self, it's our vitality, sense of vitality, and it's our soul's purpose. The sun embodies the divine mind and the soul's, possibly the soul's reason for coming into form. It's the soul's divine mind, purpose, reason for coming. So Juno in contact with the sun can create a persona that is very Juno-like and needing to establish oneself as a connector of people. Since there are many sides to Juno, remember, see which manifests at different times in your life if Juno is conjunct the sun, let's say. If Juno is in a difficult aspect, there could be a conflict between identity and relationship commitments. The moon. The moon is the body, the family, early childhood experiences and memories, emotions, emotional receptivity with others. The moon represents the person who birthed us, our mother, their body. Juno in connection with the moon can give us a Juno type of mother, parent, or caretaker. We may also need our lives to be very relationship orientated in order to feel safe or we might have a fine-tuned receptivity towards the feelings and needs of others. Difficulty might include negotiation between one's own emotional needs and that of the partner's emotional needs. The partnership that one finds themselves in may compromise their safety in some regard. Will need to establish safe and emotional receptive relationships. So one example here is Octavia Butler. So remember I said I couldn't find any information on Octavia's personal relationships. And so when we were talking about Juno in the 6th house for Octavia Butler, we were saying that I was saying that it's quite possibly indicative of her most important relationships being to her work or coming through her work. So if we look at what her Juno is in a very tight aspect to, the closest aspect that it is in something to is the moon. So you see her Juno is at 23 degrees. So if you just look at the degrees of everything else, you'll see, okay, well, there's some things here, but is anything in one of those aspects that we talked about? Well, the closest one is the moon. The moon's in Leo, which is a fire sign, and Juno is in Sagittarius, which is a fire sign. And so remember that we said just now that the moon is about receptivity and about understanding people's emotions and emotional availability or being able to be open to that. Well, if Vesta is in the 6th house and is telling us something possibly about work or working relationships, and it's sitting in a trine to the moon, who's in the 2nd house of how one makes money, one's livelihood, how one supports oneself, then is there something to be said for the connectivity that Octavia Butler was able to tap into in support of her work, or has her work in support of her? Also, if we're talking about her work, because of the 6th house and the 2nd house, then, and we're talking about Juno type of symbolism and lunar type of symbolism, both of which can be related to women or femness, or folks on the femme spectrum, then we're talking about how possibly these two might have connected into Octavia's work. And so one of the things, one of the things she might be known for is her female characters in her work. And were those characters that she wrote about, and just outside of even female characters or femme characters or gender neutral characters, in a sense, that there's a way of connecting to people through one's work in a very through a very emotional kind of place. It's done in fire sign style, so it's about creativity, it's about imagination, it's about inspiration. But there's something here in terms of being able to be very connected and related to people's emotional needs, and that occurs in one's work. Of course, I'd want to know if she was, if I was doing a reading with this person, the person that owns this chart, and we wanted to explore Juno, then I'd want to know what were your relationships like with the people that you worked with? Were there romantic relationships? Were those important? And so there could be a whole story here that I have no idea about that could better articulate this. But in terms of her work, that might be the way in, is that there was an emotional connectivity to her audience through the things that she wrote about, through the characters that she wrote about. And we might see those characters through that moon and Juno kind of, those kind of symbols or paradigms. Tori Amos. Okay, so really interesting. So just off the bat, Tori has a Scorpio rising, and she has a very good birth time rating, so that leads me to believe that that's a true rising sign for her, even though it's very late in Scorpio, so it could easily be Sag. But if it's Scorpio rising, then the traditional ruler of Scorpio is Mars. Well, Mars is in the 12th house in whole sign houses. So the 12th house is this place that's deeply mysterious and difficult to understand in a lot of ways. It has a lot to do with sorrow and loss and letting go and self-undoing and things that might feel harmful or sorrowful in our life. It has to do with incarceration. It has to do with institutions. It has to do with places where people might go and get kind of shut away. The 12th house is also this place of the part of ourself that we shut away. Sometimes, or you might see this a lot with artists that are very successful, is they might have really important things in the 12th house. And one might think, well, that's strange because aren't artists and famous people out in the limelight? And obviously, Tori has Sun, Venus in Leo right out there, again, in whole sign houses in the 10th house. So there's something very performative and very able to connect to others through career, through art, through performance. It's all in Leo. But this Mars in the 12th is important. The moon is also there, and we can see we've got Vesta and Juno here. And so if we think about that, if we think about the Vesta moon connection as being very open to connecting to others through the emotional realms, right? Juno's the relationships and the moon is the emotional connections too. Then there's already a story developing here. When I see the moon as the body and the emotional safety of somebody, and Mars together, which is the aggressor and the sometimes can talk about violence or harm. When I see the moon and Mars together, I always wonder, is the person safe? Or was there a time when the person was physically unsafe or threatened in some way? Mars is often a spear or knife or blade. And so Tori Amos, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about rape for a second. Tori Amos was raped at knife point when she was 21 in Los Angeles. She gave somebody a ride home, a man a ride home, and that happened. So there's that piece of it. Of course, she's written about it and spoken about it and sung about it. So it's been used or it's something that is not separate from her work, or it's, part of her life experience that's woven into some of her art. But that's one element of it. And if we throw Juno in there, she's married. She's been married for a long time. She has a child with the person that she's married to. So it's not that there isn't a relationship here. But if we look at the 12th house as a place where things can go wrong, and we see that Moon-Mars conjunction, and then we wonder, is this person, or was there something that happened to this person's body, physical being that was threatening? And then we look at the fact that Mars is the ruler of this person's ascendant. And so we know that the 12th house becomes a really important place to dig into and be in. And the 12th house is this place of sorrow and loss and all this really difficult stuff. But it's also a place where there is, within that sorrow and loss, possibly bound up in it, there is a great resource of creative energy. And there is a connection to possibly to the collective unconscious. So this is the place where symbols come from, possibly where we might understand things in different terms, not through a logical language per se. So I was doing some digging for Tori, and she is a prodigy, right? So by the time she was 2 years old, she could reproduce pieces of music she had only heard once. By the age of 3, she was composing her own songs. So, and the really interesting thing is that she describes seeing music as structures of light since early childhood. And so this is a quote from her. "The songs appear as light filament once I've cracked it. As long as I've been doing this, which is more than 35 years, I've never seen the same light creature in my life. Obviously, similar chord progressions follow similar light patterns, but try to imagine the best kaleidoscope ever. After the initial excitement, you start to focus on each element's stunning original detail. For instance, the sound of the words with the sound of the chord progression combined with the rhythm manifests itself in a unique expression of the architecture of color and light. I started visiting this world when I was 3, listening to a piece by Bela Bartok. I visited a configuration that day that wasn't on this earth. It was euphoric." So that's Tori Amos describing her creative process. And without being able to articulate it better, I would so put that in the 12th house. It is something otherworldly. It is a spiritual experience, possibly for some. That's how they would describe it. It is about going into one's own resources and unconscious and tapping into something that is beyond the small self. So there's a mixture here of things that I'm looking at the Juno, right? I am curious about sorrow in relationships. I'm curious about losing relationships. I'm curious about being with people that might self-sabotage or might going out with some people or being with in some relationships might be self-sabotaging for oneself, with Juno in the 12th, especially with Mars there. We know that Vesta is also here, so we know that there's a focus and a dedication to this 12th house place, to this. Remember, this 12th house is dark rooms and studios and places that are away from the world. It's where we go off to some other domain or realm. Sometimes that feels or can be an actual imprisonment. Sometimes that might just feel like an incubator, depending again on our situation, our life circumstances. So all these things together tell me that there's some kind of connection to this lunar Juno archetype lived out through the 12th house, which again, especially having Vesta there, can be talking about like the access that she has to her own creativity and the ways in which she merges with it, is in great relationship to it, that Juno is dedicated to it, that Vesta. And it could be maybe even like an overwhelming or powerful connection with that Mars. And then there are the other lived experiences of rape and of loss in certain ways. I know that there was also a miscarriage, and the moon can sometimes be about conception. And Mars there again, there's a disruption possibly. Other reasons also why I would say that in the chart, but we won't go into it now. So again, I would want to ask more questions and do some more digging, but just that Juno moon conjunction in the 12th house, in this place of great creativity, and when she's connecting to another realm of understanding, she connects to light forms through music, and this is all in the sign of Libra. Libra is the sign of the artist, the seeker of justice, the diplomat, but it's really about creating beauty, right? And the ruler of all of this is Venus, because Venus rules Libra, and Venus is in the 10th house of career. So all of this has to be used for career purposes, or needs to be used for career purposes in order for it to feel lived out in some big way. And of course, one of her albums was called To Venus and Back. So Venus is in her 10th house and all of that. Okay, next. So Mercury, so Juno and Mercury. So Mercury is the planet of communication, thinking, speaking, writing, selling. Juno in contact with Mercury can be very beneficial for establishing connections and relationships through communications, may be attracted to others due to an intellectual stimulation. In difficult aspect between Mercury and Juno, this can result in many quarrels and misunderstandings in partnerships and in relationships. We'll need to find ways to work through communication issues in partnerships. Venus and Juno. Venus, of course, is the planet of love and connection, what we value, what we attract in, our erotic energy, connection to others. Venus and Juno in aspect can create a deep need to connect in partnerships that are devoted and committed, because Juno is about the commitment. Venus is about the creative ways in which we might connect with others. This is the merging of erotic energy and the deep desire to create a sustained union with another. Relationships will be an important place to experience the potential of your Venus creative erotic energy. Difficult aspects may cause difficulty navigating conflicts between one's desires and one's commitments, and might make long-term relationships a little challenging. So Frida Kahlo had, remember that Juno in the 4th house, and her actual family home was one of the first places her and Diego were dating or courting or visiting or getting to know each other. And so there's this whole thing about her home and the connection to her relationship and wanting that deep connection, family connection, or building of a home with her partner. Her Juno is in a pretty good square to Mercury. It's within 6 degrees of a square to Mercury here in her 1st house. Again, using whole sign houses. This square, of course, is indicative of the fiery, passionate relationship that she had with Diego Rivera, where there was tremendous amount, I think, of arguing. There was, of course, she had an incredibly painful physical condition that she lived with. She lost a baby. She had miscarriages. He cheated on her, or he had other lovers. I think there was some ways in which he might not have been always so above board about his communication about who he was with, and she had other lovers, and they had a very passionate affair from what I've read. And there's a lot of dynamic confrontation in that relationship. And that might have been disruptive for Frida in terms of the kind of home or connection or established relationship that she wanted. Again, I'm not her, didn't live her life, but that's what I've gathered from what I've seen and read and know of her chart. Sylvia Rivera has, of course, Juno in Scorpio conjunct the descendant. I know that because the ascendant is here at 21. And so the descendant is going to be directly across at 21. And it's this double line here. And it's square Venus in Leo in the 4th house, right? A very close square. This is 24 degrees of Leo. Leo's a fixed sign. And this is 24 degrees of Scorpio. Scorpio is a fixed sign. So we automatically know that they are in a square relationship to each other. But we know this really because there's 2 signs in between them, right? If there's this, to here is 30 degrees, to here is 60 degrees, to here is 90 degrees. That is a square. So was there a conflict in Sylvia's life about getting her emotional needs met through committed partnership, and being able to express oneself and one's own erotic energy? That might have been part of it. But there's this natural tension here between committed partnerships and our needs and desires in partnership. And so we talked a lot about, the little bit I've been able to read and understand about her relationships, and that she had a lot of different types of relationships, some for work, some for money, some for economic reasons, sexual relationships, and some for love, and that she didn't feel very understood, again, from what I can gather from a lot of the cis men that she went out with, but that her girlfriend that she had that was also trans was somebody who was able to kind of fulfill a lot of her relationship needs. And so there's this conflict between love, which is Venus, connection, erotic energy, and committed relationships. And so again, if this was my client, I'd be wanting to unpack that. And because the Venus is in the 4th house, and we know from her life story that her relationships with her parents were very, very difficult and traumatic and violent even, that, to what extent, of course, does that impact the square between the planet of love and connection, Venus, and the asteroid of marriage and committed partnerships, Juno. And that those themes, so if this is in your chart, it's like those themes need to be worked out and made conscious, and they might not be as dramatic as they are in Sylvia's chart, but to whatever extent that's present for us, we need to be able to work it out, make it conscious, and be able to heal it. So again, there's an immediate connection here between home, Venus in the 4th house, and partnership, Juno in the 7th house, and then the love connection, Venus, and the committed partnerships, Juno. Traditional planets still. Okay, so Mars. Mars is the planet of courage, action, energy, drive, desire, anger, rage, violence, aggression. Juno in contact with Mars can harm Juno if it's by conjunction, square, or opposition. This might manifest as having difficult, if not passionate, relationships or partners. One may find relationship experiences as being too harsh, may feel attacked by partners or vice versa, or partners might feel attacked by you. By trine or sextile can promote courage and intensity in partnerships. Jupiter, the planet of plenty, faith, optimism, luck, expansion, abundance, exaggeration, inflation, indulgence, and gluttony. So Juno in contact with Jupiter can be attracted to big, influential people. Remember that Juno and Jupiter were married in the myths, so that kind of tumult may be a part of the experience here. The the tumultuous, abusive relationship between Juno and Jupiter. In the myth, some version of that might be present in somebody's chart that has Juno and Jupiter. And also, even though Jupiter is usually a very helpful planet, right? So there's the myths, and then there's the astrology, and then we've had the astrology longer than we've had those Greco-Roman myths. So which one is right? Which myth do we look at? And there's other cultures with other myths. And so, we've got to look at all the different levels of this. So Annie Sprinkle. Okay, so we know that Annie's ascendant is Libra, and so that makes Venus the ruler of her ascendant, a very important planet. And we know that Venus is in the 12th house, and we know that the 12th house is a place of behind the scenes goings on, right? This is a place where we do things in secret or in private, or they're hidden, or they're taboo a little, or they're, in the dark room, in the studio, and da-da-da. So we know that Annie Sprinkle was a porn star and is now an academic, professor, educator on sexuality in its many forms. So we know that Juno is exactly conjunct her Venus. So there's that Venus-Juno conjunction. So there's a merging of the erotic principle of Venus and the commitment-focused relationship principle of Juno. Annie Sprinkle does work with her partner, as far as I know, can tell from her website and reading her biography. So there is a committed partnership here that is also committed to Venusian-like activities and learnings. These are both in Virgo. Virgo's very conscientious, very nerdy, very loves to geek out, loves to learn things. So these two are sextile Mercury and Jupiter in the 10th house. So to the extent that I just said about Jupiter being an influence of exaggeration, or maybe Jupiterian-like, Juno-Jupiterian-like relationships, this is a sextile, so it's a positive relationship, right? This is an earth sign. Juno is a water sign. There's only one sign between them, so they're naturally in a sextile to each other. Jupiter's at 13 degrees of Cancer. These two are at 11 and 12 degrees of Cancer. This is a very close sextile. Jupiter is definitely, absolutely assisting these two. So Jupiter's lending its good graces and its abundance and its wisdom to these two. I might ask Annie, if she was in a reading with me, if she had to put up with a lot of Jupiter, kingly, obnoxious male type figures in her life. Maybe she didn't think of them like that. Maybe she didn't see them like that. Maybe that's how I would see them. But there might be that. Like, what was it like for her as a woman in the industry with as much intelligence and curiosity and power as she had? And what did she see in terms of male, female, and all kinds of gender relationships, gender expressions, and all of that? What did those Jupiter dudes, what were they like? The other thing is that we haven't learned this yet, but Jupiter does very, 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 very well in Cancer. And so this is just a naturally really good situation here. Jupiter in the 10th house is also very much a teacher and very much a wisdom holder. It's sitting next to Uranus, which is super unconventional and really about to into breaking the mold and doing something different. So there's a very gifted way of bringing through very unconventional wisdom and thought through where? The 10th house of career. It's also in a sextile to the Mercury, and Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, and so Mercury rules these two. And so they're in a really good relationship with their ruler. So it's like being at somebody's house and they're a really good friend of yours and they're really happy that you're at their house, and so they make everything available to you. And so Venus and Venus and Juno are able to do their work in the 12th house. Now, the 12th house, again, is that kind of dangerous place where things can go missing, things can get lost, we can get in trouble, we can get incarcerated, we can get into all sorts of sorrow. But for this chart, there's a good case to be made that there's something that this person will be able to get to in a behind the scenes kind of way, get to things that most people don't want to look at, or in a positive way, that there's help here. Jupiter's assisting them to do their work. And to go in and maybe tap into that collective unconscious about what? Well, it's about Venus and Juno type things, which is relationships and sexuality, connection, erotic energy. And so is this connected? So the ruler of the 12th house of secrets and behind the scenes stuff that has Venus and Juno in it is in the 10th house of public endeavors and in the 10th house of career, and is the planet Mercury, which likes to talk all the time. And so it's here to tell you something. It's here to give you some information. So that's, and you've got like both, Jupiter is the teacher and Mercury is a communicator in the 10th house of career. So we know that this person is a teacher. In some way, there's some information that wants to come through. And again, it's got shocking Uranus sitting right next to it. So it wants to rock the boat some. It's trine the moon in Taurus. So this is Juno. It's sending a trine ray to the moon. Why do we know that? Well, the moon's in Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign. Juno's in Virgo. Virgo's an earth sign. They're 4 degrees away from each other. So it's a pretty nice trine. So there's something that Juno's getting helped. Again, there's this connectivity from the moon. There's this moon, Juno, Venus thing, which they're all about connection, and they're all about connecting into something and establishing relationship and harmony. The moon's really powerful in Taurus. Venus is the ruler of Taurus. So there's a mutuality here. So it's these 3 things are all in a really nice situation. They help each other out a lot. The 8th house is the place of other people's resources, working in partnership, producing things with people, and she's definitely done all of that. The square to Vesta. So we haven't really talked about Juno Vesta, but the interesting thing is that Vesta is in the 9th house. The 9th house is a place of learning, teaching, and learning institutions. So Vesta in the 9th house feels like a natural priestess situation, right? Going back to our Vesta teachings, we're like, oh yeah, well, Vesta in the 9th house knows how to be a priestess, knows how to do sexual ritual, knows how to do things in a manner that rituals that might include one's sexuality, but done for the purpose of spirituality, of spiritual kind of bliss or union in some way. So there's that piece of it. The other piece is there might be a devotion to education. Now, on her website, Annie Sprinkle says she's the first porn star to get her PhD. That's her words. I don't know if that's true. I would challenge that. but I guess in terms of porn star, and I guess in terms of when she got it, maybe she was the first one that she knew of. So there's a connection and a dedication to academia, the 9th house, Vesta in the 9th house. But my question again would be, was there a conflict because it's in a square to Juno? Was there a conflict about who she had been? Not who she had been, the work that she had been doing or that she had done. I think she had stopped doing porn films in the way that she had been when she went to go get her PhD. I believe so. I might be wrong. But was there a conflict in the institution about her public persona and being in the institution? If I know academic institutions, there's all sorts of very bizarre human behavior and judgments and all of that. So I would assume that that might have been part of how that played in. And I'd also wonder if it was at all challenging for her to allow herself to go get her PhD, if there was any, feelings of worthiness or whatever to work out because of this square between Juno and Vesta, just being about the work or the field, the industry that she was in, and then bringing that into academic circles. I would think that would be challenging in some way, but I could be totally wrong. But that's how that's where I would go with the square. between Juno and Vesta, just because of Juno's connection with Venus and the work that she does, and all the other connections that we talked about. Okay, Bill Clinton. Oh, God. I only include his chart because we talked about Bill Clinton's chart in Vesta. We talked about having Vesta in the 7th house conjunct the descendant, and how that might be speaking to his wife, because it's the 7th house of the person we're married to, and Vesta being very independent as a asteroid, as a marker. And so having a partner that is a Vesta type person might be like, well, they're pretty self-sufficient. And it's also in Aries, so that might be extra self-sufficient. Then we add in Juno, and more of the story unfolds. So remember, the first house is the house of self, is the house of I am. We've got a Libra rising, Libra first house. So that's the diplomat, the one that wants to be in partnership, the one that's super charming and charismatic, yada, yada. Venus is the ruler of the ascendant. Venus is here in Libra, really strong. Venus is sitting next to Neptune, which is the planet that can confuse and distort things and be very, very, very glamorous. Help us be very glamorous. Venus and Neptune together can be all kinds of charming in all kinds of dangerous ways. Mars on the other side of that lets us know that there's something about this person's motivations that might not be totally brought to consciousness, or might not be totally above the table, let's say. Mars and Neptune together can be a very confusing way of moving through the world, and could be very good at sleight of hand tricks. Listen, a lot of really good people in the world have that signature, so that's not the only way it can manifest. But of course, I'm looking at somebody whose chart we know and whose antics we know about, and whose, there's a lot of allegations against him for rape and sexual assault and abusing his power with young women and all of the things. So because I'm biased, because I can be biased because I know is part of his life story, we can say that possibly that Venus-Neptune is a little sneaky, to say the least. So they've got Mars, Neptune, Venus, right? So there's Mars, Neptune, Venus, and then Chiron, the wounded healer, which we'll leave for a moment. And then we've got this Jupiter-Juno situation. They're within 2 degrees of each other. So let's break this down. Does Bill have a partner that helps him immensely? I'd say so. So if Juno is Bill's way of being in partnership, or is it, it's like, if we're looking at this through a heteronormative lens, which I hate to do, then someone might say, Juno in a man's chart is his wife, and Juno in a woman's chart is her, which is gross and very reductive. But if we want it to be gross and reductive, we might say that Juno would represent another part of Hillary, another part of his wife, and that she would be assisting his ego, his identity, his persona, his first house, not his ego, his identity and his persona, assisting it and lifting it up because it's sitting there with Juno. So it's lucky in some way. And it's sitting there also with Venus. So he's got both benefics in the first house. So he's like really set up for some things. And then we might say, well, is the Juno Jupiter conjunction here talking about him being the king, him being the, King Jupiter up in the sky, and his wife being the one who's cheated on, betrayed, and abandoned? Is that part of the thing? Is part of his identity all of those things? If these are all in the first house, then he's also inhabiting all of these things. But there's some very lucky connection here between the Jupiter-Juno thing for him, for his self. And so does it help his wife? Doesn't, it's maybe that would be like if Juno only represented Hillary, his wife, then it would look like, quite lucky for her. And maybe she would say that it was, or maybe she would say it totally wasn't. And she would have got, who knows what she would have done on her own. But certainly there has been the archetype of that Juno-Jupiter relationship lived out through his personality. He was the big, everybody loves Bill guy, doing all sorts of things that he got away with because of the society we live in. And his wife got to get away with nothing, got to deal with the consequences of all of his abusive behavior, abuse towards other women, all of his unchecked energy that was, that goes out into the world. He gets to have all the charisma, and she gets to have she gets the bill. She gets not the Bill Clinton. She gets him, but she also gets the check, like hey, this is what he owes. She seems to have to pay for it, which is part of the myth too. So again, yes, maybe that Juno is her, but that Vesta might also be her too, right? So it's like looking at both of them and seeing how they both get played out through his life. So maybe he just needs a Juno to support him. Maybe he's always, if it wasn't going to be her, it would have been somebody else. And that he might need that dynamic of being the big king to the betrayed woman. Again, maybe that's all very reductive and very heteronormative in terms of that's just a paradigm that would play out inside of patriarchy, inside of a heterosexual relationship. But certainly there's a lot of evidence of how we've all lived that out with them, or witnessed it being lived out through them. So all of that. What else? I might come back to this. Coretta King. Remember, her Juno is in the 8th house. It's sextile to Jupiter in the 6th house. So I just wanted to point out a different type of Jupiter Juno connection. This is a very helpful one. Again, Juno conjunct Jupiter might also be just wildly helpful. Again, who knows what Hillary has done behind the scenes for Bill and his career. But it looks like a tremendous amount, because it looks like there's this archetype of some partnership holding him up. This is, again, a sextile, so it's helpful. It's soft, but it's helpful. But it's between Jupiter and Juno. And who did Coretta King marry but somebody who was very Jupiter in Pisces-ish? Remember that, or I don't know if we didn't do this in this course, but Martin Luther King also had a moon in Pisces, conjunct Venus in Pisces, which is exalted and really well situated. She's got Jupiter in Pisces, which is phenomenal also, next to the moon. And so they both have the signature of this very spiritual, Pisces is a sign of the pacifist, so the nonviolent spiritual path, we could say. This falls in Coretta King's 6th house of work and service, and the way one would conduct oneself with one's employees and coworkers and all of that. But it's assisting her Juno. And so if Juno tells us about who we are committed to, or maybe some of those partnerships, then the sextile to Jupiter tells us something about the nature of being attracted and being committed to somebody who's spiritual in nature and of service in the 6th house. And then also we see her Venus, the goddess of love, in the 9th house of spirituality and religion and all of that. So there's many factors kind of looping in and telling us the same thing. But there you have it. A very good Jupiter connected to a Juno in the 8th house of inheritances and working with somebody, collaborating with somebody, and also death and loss. Okay, more planets. So Saturn, constriction, form, slowing, aging, maturing, rules, authority, mastery. Juno in contact with Saturn can harm Juno if it's in conjunction, square, opposition. Saturn is withholding, strict, cold, stern. Saturn limits and restricts. Together, Juno may feel more alone or more unloved or more isolated than it normally would. Or this may be a signature of needing relationships with folks that are older, wiser, and more conservative in style, may want a conservative type of relationship. Whatever the situation, the rules and commitments of the relationship will be very important. Okay, so modern planets. So since the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, aren't part of the traditional philosophical system, we look at them a little differently, like I've said. Modern planets don't rule an aspect or a sign in traditional astrology, but they are very powerful and should be taken into consideration. Uranus can lend a tone or create experiences that feel volatile at times, create trauma when in conjunctions, oppositions, and squares, but can also make us radical, boldly inventive, and shocking in our ability to break through old traditions and implement new visions for the future. Juno and Uranus in aspect can speak to being in relationships that are unique, break the traditional partnership paradigms, and can be disruptive or disrupted. Uranus doesn't always do consistency, but it does unconventionality. Audre Lorde. So Juno is in Sagittarius at 27 degrees. The next fire sign over is Aries. And who's there? Uranus, 24 degrees. So they're within a 3-degree orb of a trine. Audre Lorde had many lesbian relationships. Her, long-term committed partner, the two of them had, especially at that time, to be an out lesbian black couple is, it's still there's still many barriers and it's still breaking many, again, heteronormative traditions and norms, but any time past the future, it also was even more shocking or even more revolutionary or even more diverging from the norm. Her Juno also sextiles everything in her 5th house, but most potently her sun and Saturn. And so for somebody who is famous for, one of the things she's famous for is, the uses of the erotic, the power of the erotic, having all that 5th house stuff in terms of the 5th house being a place of erotic energy and sexuality, and Venus is there, planet of erotic energy, in sextile with her Juno in the 3rd house of writing and communicating, and sets up a good, healthy communication between Juno and her 3rd house of what she's going to talk about, and the 5th house of creative energy, and that there's something very important about Audre Lorde's work in terms of her evaluations of relationships and the importance of that it was very important in the ways in which she talked about relationships, specifically lesbian relationships, and love, and what that meant for her. That was an important piece of her work. So the Juno, the commitment, the relationship being in support of her sun, her identity in the 5th house of love and love affairs and lovers and sex and all of that is important in terms of her part of what she wrote about and what she put out into the world. And if I was, going to go deeper with this with a client, then I'd say, well, Juno's also in a supportive relationship with Saturn. And so, rules and boundaries and guidelines for relationship are really important. It doesn't mean that there has to be a monogamous setup at all, but it does mean that there has to be good boundaries laid down in terms of however it is you commit to another person. Neptune, so modern planet still. So Neptune aspects can make us feel very confused, lost to addictions and escapism, empathetic and without boundary. But Neptune's also highly creative, impressionistic, and spiritual. Neptune in aspect to Juno can yearn for a spiritual union, one that is otherworldly and idealistic. One might end up attracted to folks that are elusive, or folks who are martyrs or have a savior complex, or we might be that person, or both. We might be that and attract that at some point in our lives. There will be a need for some kind of transcendent experience through committed relationships. Pluto aspects speak to power, intensity, and transformation. Aspects to Pluto can create experiences that feel like underworld journeys, abductions, and renewals. Juno and Pluto in aspect can create relationships that are transformational, extreme, and intense. Can denote an obsessive type of partnership, one that has to deal with power dynamics head on. The ascendant. Okay, so the ascendant's the rising, right? It's the point of our rising sign. So a place of self, a place of life, body, motivation for living out the soul's purpose. Juno in contact with the ascendant can create Juno-like identity or have relationships or being a protector of... Juno in contact with the ascendant can create Juno-like identity or have relationships that are really important to one's identity. Or it could be about being a protector of women, that's something that you embody, or femmes or gender nonconforming people as a motivation for living one's life. The midheavens, the place of career, reputation, public life, it's high noon. Juno in connection with the midheaven can speak to the most important relationships coming through career, or that career is one of the most important relationships. So Johnny Cash. So Johnny Cash has Juno in Cancer conjunct Pluto. So in terms of, we talked about the fact that June Carter was somebody he was in love with, apparently, again, just this is all hearsay, from the time he was very young, because he heard her voice, he heard her singing on the radio, and was in love with her from the moment he laid eyes on her. And they were musicians together, they sung together, they created art together, and then they were finally lovers and married. So his union, his committed partnership, his wife, is very interwoven into his entire music career. Fifth house, creativity. Was that a transformational relationship? This Juno is sitting next to Pluto. Absolutely. He credited her for getting him sober and off of drugs. I think it took a long time. I think he was in and out of a kind of not healthy relationship with intoxicants, and she was there, and there was a lot of that, many transformations and healings, I think, that they went through. His Juno is trining everything in the first house, including his ascendant. Mars, Mercury, Sun, ascendant, North Node. North Node is a place of increasing appetite. So there's, having North Node conjunct the ascendant can make one very hungry for success and even fame. Juno in a trine to all of that. We know it's a trine. Why? Because Pisces is the first house. Pisces is a water sign, and Cancer is what Juno is in, and Cancer is also a water sign. So they're naturally in a trine together to each other. Juno, his partner, his committed partner, his wife, is helping him in his life's purpose, in his motivation for living, in all that he does. First house, him. The first house is him. The sun is there. It's him. And the partnership, the marriage, possibly also the wife, is assisting all of that, or sending her goodness to that. Or the marriage to the creative muse assists his whole entire vitality life situation. So more points. The descendant is the place of the other, the relationship. It's the sundown place. It's the place where the sun goes down. Juno next to the descendant is the same as Juno in the seventh house, just with an added emphasis and potency. So remember, Sylvia Rivera had the Juno on the descendant in the seventh house. And so there's this added emphasis on her being the partner, the other, the one who people go to. So that's something I would always ask again in a client situation. Do you always feel like you're the partner to everybody? Is there some important piece to that? And then do you feel like Juno, the betrayed, the forgotten, the one who is at a loss for the equal commitment coming back to them? The IC is a place of familial connection, so I'll show you where the IC is. So here's the midheaven. Directly across from it will be the IC. So it's going to be at 25 degrees. Wait. Yeah. No, 25 degrees. Sorry. Here. Yikes. So you see this double blue line with nothing here. I don't know why they don't write it in, but they don't. So directly across from the midheaven is the IC. The IC is the place of familial connections, roots, home, family, midnight. Juno's connection here speaks to the dynamic between parents and or the personality of a parent or the dynamic of their relationships. So if you have Juno, like if Juno was here, then I would say like that maybe the mother or father or parent was the one who was very Juno-like in nature. And again, depending on what part of Juno's myth they were acting out. Or that there is something important about the relationship and establishing a home together, a home in the relationship, or a relationship that creates home together. So Juno in connection to the IC is similar to Juno in the 4th house. Okay, and then the North Node is that place of rising up, ascending, increasing. Some relate the North Node to grasping for things, a hunger or an appetite for achievement or success. That's why I said Johnny Cash's North Node next to his ascendant was a mark of somebody that might want to be famous or something hungry about the persona. The motivation for living is to get some big thing. Some relate the North Node to the work we need to tackle in this lifetime, in the places that we need to grow ourselves into. The North Node in your natal chart points to a place where you might have a hunger, a desire, and a need to develop an experience as part of your life. If the North Node is sitting next to Juno or Juno sitting next to the North Node, it will increase Juno's signification. So the desires for relationship will increase, or the type of people that we go for will be bigger types of people, or the Juno situation in our life will be that much more magnified. The South Node is the opposite of that. The South Node is the point of descending energy. It's in a sense a downward pull or a drain, or like a kind of flushing out point. Some relate this to loss, former incarnations, or what we have done in the past and no longer need to focus on. Some astrologies consider the South Node a point that connects us to the powerful energies of the unconscious that can, when dealt with, lead us to experience our spiritual nature. Juno by the South Node might experience the dissolving of unions as an important spiritual initiation, or maybe working through the biggest spiritual lessons through partnerships. That's it. Now the hard work is to look at your chart and try to figure out what part of this relates to the Juno in your chart as you're looking at it and as you're living it out. Again, start with the most obvious aspects. Start with the closest aspect. So if your Juno is sitting really close to another planet, start there and think about what that might mean. Consider the house and the sign that your Juno's in, and then add the meaning of that planet and what the two of them might mean together. And then see if it makes sense, and then see if you can add another piece on. And of course, you can always leave me a comment in the Dropbox, and I'll help work it out, work through it with you, to see if it helps you and helps to articulate another part of your chart or another piece about your relationships or your need in relationships. And that's it. That's it for these, Vesta and Juno. There's one other little video here that is about how to look to see if Juno or Vesta or any other planet is transiting your chart. So meet me over at that video. All right. Lots of love. Bye for now.